So can you get a band 7 in IELTS exam in less than 3 months? Well, the short answer is no. Basically, unless you are already at that level. So this in this lesson or this discussion, I want to kind of do it a little bit differently than my previous videos. I just want to kind of rant a little bit about people who are taking English exams like the IELTS or the Cambridge or whatever else they decide to take. Yeah. And kind of like to put these kind of things in perspective, to put your expectations in perspective, you know? So, usually with most of these exams, they you need them for, immigration, or you need them for studying abroad. And typically, depending on the thing, but a lot of places will ask for like a B2 level in the language, right? A proficient level of the language where you can cope with everyday situations, right? Some cases you need more advanced level, and other cases you can get away with like a lower intermediate level. So in this sort of discussion, I actually want to go deeper into what I actually mean by B2 or low intermediate level or advanced, or and then knowing all of that, how you should approach exams if you have certain goals and so on, right? You know, so so I guess in this video, I'm gonna first break down the CEFR, the sort of European framework of classifying, people's levels, and I'll give my own interpretation of those levels, which I find super helpful. Is a really nice rule of thumb that I've been able to use to like classify my own students, and having spoken to 1,000 students. I feel like I have a good idea of what these levels actually look like in real life. Yeah. So, to begin with, it's always easiest to start with like the most advanced level, C1, right? Or we can call it advanced. Yeah. So, with advanced, basically, the people are using very natural English. Yeah. What I mean by that is that they're using the normal expressions of English, of the English language. They're not using their own native language expressions in English. They're not translating, they're not putting the English in their structure. They're just using the normal natural structures of English in their everyday speech. Typically, what I've found is that their native accent is going to be much softer. More, and also they will maybe acquire some or a lot of the American or British accent, depending on whatever they were exposed to more, right? And and even these guys will still make mistakes, you know. I have a student at, maybe he's near C2 level, right? Or he's probably C2 or very close anyway. And he still makes a mistake in every like 30-minute conversation we have. So, you're always gonna still make mistakes, no matter how advanced you are. You're still gonna have a lot of questions, and your questions are gonna be quite subtle, right? But you're still gonna have a lot of things, but you're gonna understand a lot. So you even if I correct you, you'll know that is the correct form of the language or the correct expression, right? So you have an innate, almost native like understanding of the language, right? So and or near native like, right? Then that's the C1, that's advanced. What's a B2? B2 is basically someone who's very comfortable with the language, but just doesn't use the normal expressions of the language. They will use their own expressions. Very common example. With Spanish speakers, they're going to say more or less, more or less, more or less with but that's so common for them. And it's common enough, but they seem to use it way more, you know? Or for example, very, very common, I have 31 years, right? Instead of saying I am 31 years old, right? they're gonna use their own grammar in English, even though it makes sense that he has 31 years in his life, yeah. But he's gonna use that expression instead of the actual natural one, which is I am 31 years old, right? And they can say that very fluently, very quickly. Yeah. But yeah, so they're very comfortable and they can understand most things a native speaker will say. Although of course they'll slip, they will, be unsure in certain places, right? With B1 or let's say lower intermediate, these people they're comfortable in many sorts of contexts, right? But they also have large gaps in their knowledge and they make a lot more mistakes, right? The B2 as well will make mistakes a lot, but the kind of mistakes they're making are more structural. They just mess up with the structure of their sentences or the kind of expressions or the grammar and things like that. But they're not really, and but in general, they're saying very coherent sentences. Whereas with B1 can say sentences kind of mixed up in a mixed up way. Anything lower than B1, like a beginner, yeah, essentially doesn't know very much, uh, can't understand very much, right? And and really doesn't really know how to say very much, doesn't understand very much. It's very difficult to speak with a beginner, right? It's very uncomfortable to speak with a beginner. I would say with a B1, I can feel comfortable, but I'm not as comfortable as I am with a B2, right? And depending on the level, I'm even at the B2, I might not be totally comfortable, but I'm usually quite comfortable as a native speaker with other like B2 speakers. But with B1, I have to change the way I speak a little bit. I have to be slower. With A2, A1, with beginners, basically I'm speaking like this very carefully. I enunciate every word, and yeah, so I'm speaking like that basically, and it's very uncomfortable to be honest, right? So that's kind of like the breakdown. Now, how does this apply, or how is this relevant to the IELTS exam, um, or any other exams for that matter, but the IELTS specifically, right? Because I have more experience with that. So typically, there are 9 bands in the IELTS exam, right? And typically, band 7 and above is like advanced, right? So if you get band 7, you're advanced in the language. Essentially, you're very high B2 or a C1, right? And you know then band 6 is roughly equivalent to a B2. Band 5 is obviously roughly equivalent to a B1. Yeah. Now a lot of places, let's say if you want to study in the UK, a lot of universities will ask for 5.5 overall, 5.5 or 6. And if you want to do a PhD, you need 6.5. If you want to be a doctor in the UK, you need 7, right? So, and for immigration purposes, typically you'll need a 6. Yeah. And in some cases, I know if you want to get a permanent residency in Canada, you need a 7 overall, right? So those are kind of like the different, depending on what you're applying to or who you're applying to, they will have their own specific requirements, right? But in general, they're asking for B2 and above. Like if you think about it, they're asking for B2 or above. So, you know, now we come to sort of like the meat and potatoes of this video, which is, well, okay, let's say you wanna study, it's September, or it's the end of your academic year, you want to apply to a British university and you need to get a thick, right? But then you come to me with a level 5 kind of English, right? And you want to take the exam next month. Yeah. And then you say, hey, I wanna get a level 6 next month. Yeah, probably unlikely to happen because what you're saying is, I want to go from B1 to B2 in 1 month. Yeah. You know, studying for the IELTS doesn't make your English automatically better. You know, to make your English better, to make your English B2 or C1, you have to understand more and you have to have more practice, right? So how practicing the exam only makes you good at the exam, but the flaws, your inability to think of the words, to say words naturally, to say correctly, to say that you use the correct collocation, to use the correct pronunciation, to use the correct grammar in the correct situation. All of that comes from exposure, understanding, practice, and time, right? To process all of that. So you're not going to go from B1 to B2 in like 1 month, unless, of course, you like really study 10 hours a day, every day for a month. More likely, you're looking at 6 months, right? Maybe 3 months if you're really dedicated. But if you already have a full-time job, you're looking at 6 months, right? Um, and then I even get the situation of people who are at maybe a B2 level, but they want to get the C1 level, right? Or essentially they're at a six, a band six, right? But they want to get a band seven, right? Now, a band six in IELTS essentially means you are pretty decent at answering the questions, but you make frequent errors in your vocabulary, in your pronunciation, in your grammar. You frequently hesitate, so your fluency is down, right? And hence you get a six. If you got seven, a lot of these things would be better, right? You're using correct collocations, you're pronouncing things correctly, putting the right stress on the words and the sentences. So, and things like that, right? Using the correct grammar, you're not making a lot of grammar mistakes. Let's say per answer, you're not making more than one or two mistakes. Yeah, you know. So yeah, then you're probably getting a seven, right? But if you're making three, four, five mistakes in each answer of your speaking, then of course you're going to end up getting a six. And then if you say things that don't make sense to the examiner, you're going to get a five max, right? For that particular aspect, right? So if you said a word that they didn't understand, you're gonna get five for vocabulary. If you said a grammar point a grammar structure they didn't understand, like you just mixed up your sentence, like, and they didn't even understand what you said, then that would be again five. If you mispronounce something so badly that they didn't understand the word you said, again five for pronunciation, right? If everything else is pretty good. So yeah, so basically, if you were a five and you wanted a seven, if you're a B1 and you want to reach C1, right? Then you're just in a few months, then you're just dreaming. You're just dreaming, right? And to put it in perspective, the time it took you, if you like were consistent with your studies and so on, the time it took you to get to B2 from the beginning, from scratch, from A1, yeah, essentially to go from, so that the time from, A1 to B2, right? Then to go from B2 to C1 is essentially double the time it took you to get to B2 in the first place. So if it took you 2 years to get to B2, it's going to now take you 4 years, 4 extra years to go from B2 to C1, right? And that's if you're going at a roughly the same pace. If you studied more hours and stuff like that, 5 hours per day, 8 hours per day, you're using the language, you're talking with native speakers, you're studying the language, you're watching movies, you're reading books, then yeah, fine. You know, maybe 1, 2 years you can get there. But if you're just sort of 1 hour study a day, yeah, then you're looking at 2 or 3 years to go from B2 to C1. And that's with actual dedication. Yeah. And with more dedication, it can be a bit faster, but no faster than like a year. Yeah, it's still gonna be a long slog to get from B2 to C1. So if you are if you're in the situation where you're at a B2 level, you're getting a 6 on the IELTS exam and you need a 7, then you really need to study for at least 1 year, at least, yeah, until you get to, and then you should actually, you know, get yourself tested to see what, I mean, tested by a tutor or something to see what level you would get, to see if it's even worth trying to get the 7, because no amount of exam technique is going to turn you from a sort of upper intermediate to an advanced speaker. Yeah, because there's just there's a clear difference. There's just a clear difference. Essentially, it's like someone who's done 100 push-ups compared to someone who's done 1 million. That is like the kind of difference between a B2 and a, maybe not that extreme. Let's say instead of 1 million, let's say 100,000, right? So the difference between 100 and 100,000, that's the difference between a B2 and a C1, right? It's just as simple as that, right? They've just done way more than you have, right? So I guess this video is more of a rant, more of a reality check, hopefully, and give yourself time. Don't take an exam that you're unsure what results you're going to get at the end of it, right? You should only be taking language exams when you know that you're going to get that mark. Otherwise, you're just wasting, in the case of IELTS exam, you're just wasting $300 per attempt, right? You know, and then on top of that, you're obviously taking lessons and stuff like that. All that money you could save all that money by simply spending hours reading, hours watching movies on Netflix, right? Hours learning vocabulary, right? Memorizing structures, practicing structures. A lot of self-study could get you there, without all this stuff. But I mean, that's not to discourage, studying with teachers and courses and stuff. But, you know, throwing money at the problem is not going to magically make you understand more. It could give you pressure to understand more, but the reality is you'll only understand as much as you expose yourself to the language. So, anyways, if that was useful, please like and subscribe. From time to time, I want to make these little rant videos because, I think about how people learn languages and it sometimes bothers me, what I see in the real world. So, well, that was my rant for today, and I hope to see you in the next one. Yeah. Have a great day, guys. Bye bye. Yeah.